What's going on, everybody, and welcome to episode 103 of the Book Binge, where this week we're talking about a book, but really a short story collection, and one that I don't actually have physically yet, because at the time that I'm recording, there isn't even, a cover art for it. At the time that I'm releasing this, I'm sure there's cover art, so I'm just going to do this here so that I can stick the cover right up there in the, in the middle of the screen so that you can see it. Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 3, and the reason that I'm able to do this because there isn't cover art, or because the book isn't actually out yet at the time that the review is coming out, is because of the fact that I was offered an opportunity to copy edit this collection by Mr. Ruocchio himself, which I'm very grateful for the opportunity to do. With that, I suppose I should say that this is a disclaimer. I did copy edit Tales of Sun Eater Volume 3 and therefore had a little bit of early access, but none of my thoughts are affected by that experience. None of my thoughts are also, influenced by my friendship that I've started to develop with Mr. Ruocchio himself. Obviously, I will never stop doing fully open and honest opinions in my reviews, regardless of what direction they're going to be. And frankly, the reading experience that I had here was with an unrevised proof. None of the actual content changed between the time that I read it and the time and between what I read, I guess, and what you guys will be able to read. Only some of the more technical material, and part of this was just kind of like a test run on my end of things. And I was just, like I said, very grateful to have the opportunity to do it. Finally, another aspect to this introduction that I will mention is that a handful of these were actually available to read pretty early on, those being Mother of Monsters, the Archaenaut, and Gutter Ballet, which were all available in various Bane book collections, over the course of the last, year and a half or something like that, depending on when they were written and published in those forms. And then there were another 3 of them, Reincarnation, A Parable in Iron, and Daughter of Swords, that were all available to read via Ruocchio's Patreon if you are subscribed to the appropriate tier to be able to have some of that behind-the-scenes stuff. So really, all things considered, there's only one of these stories that wasn't sort of available in some way, shape, or form to read in the first place anyway. So yeah, that's just kind of all of this, all of the disclaimer, and with kind of that in the way, let's just actually get into the review, which I'm going to format similar to how I believe I formatted the short story collection reviews in the past with those and Derrida Books collections there. I'm going to talk about each story briefly individually with their own independent score. I normally don't do scores on the channel, but, I figure why not with a bunch of short stories. The collection starts off with After the Feast, which is the only one of these stories in the collection that, like I mentioned, was not available in some way, shape, or form before the release of the collection. And let me tell you what, it is a fantastic opener, and it is really going to get you guys in the collection. This story has major Kingdoms of Death spoilers, so I will mention that right off the bat so that you don't go into it without having read Kingdoms of Death, or even Ashes of Man to a certain degree, for that matter, with one of the stories in here. So that you don't go into this collection having read that, or having not read that and then being spoiled by, a couple pretty big things. If you've read Kingdoms of Death and you've read the title of the story, you probably know what this is about. Loved getting to see these events unfold the way that they did. It stung, but I definitely needed it. It's a little bit of a darker story at the very start, but it was greatly appreciated. I really enjoyed After the Feast. Easy 5 out of 5 for me, just like most Sun Eater material. The next story in the collection was Reincarnation, which was actually also supposed to come out in a, was it a small press or something like that? I forget what Ruocchio called the press that it was originally supposed to release in, that got disbanded or basically went under or whatever, so the story never actually got published there. It was on Patreon, but this was one that was a little bit different. I think this might be Ruocchio's most explicitly experimental in terms of the writing of the story, and that I really appreciated. The structural and perspective changes that occur throughout the story are really cool and really unique, and I really appreciated that aspect of the story. And surprisingly, it all works out really well. This was probably the hardest to copy edit on my end. I had to do a little bit more of a second pass on this one than any of the other stories I did because of all the unique structural and perspective elements. Sorry, English is really hard for me at the moment. But I did love all the hints that this had for certain aspects to the universe introduced in Howling Dark. It's one of the lesser focuses on it, but I just appreciated the way that Ruocchio explored humanity with this story in a much different way than normal, even though a lot of the same thematic undertones pin it. The third story in the collection is A Parable in Iron, which is inspirationally unique. It's a little bit different than all of the other stories that Ruocchio has done for completely different reasons than Reincarnation is different than all of the stories Ruocchio has done. I loved where Parable in Iron got some of its inspiration from. It has parable in the style, so, or in the title, so a lot of the style of the story is a little bit more parabolic in nature, reminiscent of some parables, say, in the Bible, or even just in ancient historical texts, like from fathers mentoring their children with parables, with stories, or parents teaching their children with stories, because this is an easy way for children to learn stuff. So that's kind of the framing for A Parable in Iron, and even then the story told within it is really cool. I loved the way that the prose and basically everything that Ruocchio used to actually write the story was shifted slightly to suit that parable nature. It was just great. The way that this story represents how morals are taught through stories, not just in the real world, but also kind of hints at, that sort of very minute aspect of world building within the Sun Eater universe is also just really cool as well. This one, I thought it was great. I think it's the shortest story in this collection, and it's better off for it. But I really enjoyed it. It's amongst the, upper middle tier to lower high tier of the Sun Eater short stories. It's a really good one, albeit a little bit different. Mother of Monsters was the next story in the collection, which was very good and follows after the trend of mind-blowing Sun Eater ideas that just kind of melt the brain for the best reasons. So stuff that kind of happens in, let's say, the second act or something like that of Demon in White has a lot of stuff that I just absolutely boggled my mind in the best ways, and I think boggled plenty of other readers' minds in similar ways. Mother of Monsters has an element of that in it. It was told a lot different than I was expecting for it to be, but just it was super conducive to this sort of explorative element to the story that I just thought worked really well. I really enjoyed Mother of Monsters. It took a little bit to get into because I was expecting it to unfold and be told a little bit differently, but once I was in it, I was in, and it has, frankly, probably the best ending of any of Ruocchio's short stories, unless you count Queen of Mid-Ashes as a short story, because that one has the best final line of nearly anything ever, but Mother of Monsters was very good. The next story in the collection was The Archaenaut, which I think is a very cool story because similar to, I think, Parliament of Owls, I think The Archaenaut is probably the easiest story to convert into a novel. It's the most easily converted, anyway. It would be super cool to get a story more or less just like this in a novelized format. If Ruocchio wanted to do something like that, I would be totally in for it, because when I gave him that sort of reaction that it had, that sort of feel to it when I was talking to him in DMs about it at one point, like right after I finished copy editing it, he was like, yeah, that's pretty much what I felt. Like it would make a really cool individual novel as well. There was also a really fun element to this that isn't it's not explicitly spoilery, but like very minor sort of conceptual spoilers. This story has a very fun way to utilize English as a language in the text, written in our literal English language, even though the standard language of the universe at this point in the story is not English. So utilizing English as a separate language in a text that's written in our English, it's a little hard to explain, but the way that Ruocchio did this was actually really cool. Just in the context of the story, I thought it worked rather neatly. It's caught me off guard at first, but it was really cool. And this one has, I don't know, it's just really good. It's not one of my favorites, I wouldn't necessarily say, but what it was doing and the way that it capitalized on that just was beautiful, especially the ending of it. The contact that is made in the story all the way through the end of it is just amazing. Like, just the way that Ruocchio plays with language in the story is what I think hooked me the most. Gutter Ballet is the second to last story in the collection. and at the time that I read it, was my favorite story in the collection and one of my favorite short stories in the universe in general. Easy 5 out of 5 for me. At the time that I read this, like I said, it was my favorite because of the way that it reminded me of one of my other favorite Sun Eater short stories, Parliament of Owls, which I think Parliament of Owls might still be my favorite. Actually, no, it's not. Maybe it is. Who knows? I'd have to reread it to see for sure, but Parliament of Owls, prior to reading this collection, was my favorite short story in the Sun Eater, and I think might have been like my number 3. Just anything written within Sun Eater, it was my number 3 of all time for it. It has some of those noir vibes of Parliament of Owls, Gutter Ballet does, so that's part of why Gutter Ballet I just think worked for me so well. The themes of Gutter Ballet also interlocked with some of those found in the story Victim of Changes, also from Tales Volume 1, and has some of the storytelling elements of Kill the King from Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 2. So Gutter Ballet just feels like this really great culmination of a lot of the best elements of some of the previous short stories. And I just thought that made for something really incredible, and the story itself was really great and thematically impactful. Finally, we come to the last short story within Tales of the Sun Eater Volume 3, being Daughter of Swords, and this one is post Ashes of Man spoilers. So if you have not read through the full series, and then also preferably have read the short story The Royal Game found in Grimdark Magazine issue 34, I believe it is, before this, go back and read all that first. Like I said, major spoilers for everything, quite frankly, in the series. So don't read Daughter of Swords until you've read everything else prior to it, which is why I'm very glad that it was also the last story in the collection. And I think it also doesn't juxtapose, it kind of mirrors, I suppose, After the Feast as the first short story in some ways, in terms of the characters that are involved, or the types of characters that are involved, and therefore the type of story that is being told. Much different, but I really enjoyed Daughter of Swords. I think this one might have taken the throne from Parliament of Owls as my favorite Sun Eater short story. It's just great. It's fantastic. I loved everything about this story. I really can't say anything about it without actually spoiling the story, just as well as the whole series, as I've kind of hinted at up to this point. But the protagonist, the events of the stories, the morals inherent within the story, even more so than just kind of like the implied morals of everything else, or even the explicit morals of Parable and Iron even. And also the character interactions as well. Everything about the story was just very good. It was a perfect story, at best of the collection, probably my favorite overall at this point, and also, like I said, strangely wraps up the collection by mirroring some aspects to After the Feast, which started the collection. Parliament may or may not still be my favorite. Daughter of Swords and Parliament are just kind of right up there. I'll be rereading Parliament at some point, I think this year, so we'll see which one I determine at that point is actually my favorite, but this is definitely there in the top 3. In terms of the recommendation, if you're already invested in this series, there's no reason, not even a little bit of a reason, not to read this collection. I think it's the best collection of all 3 of them. Between Tales 1, 2, and 3, I think 3 might be the best of the 3. It's at least my personal favorite of the 3. It has the most bangers within it, and even the non-bangers are also still bangers, even Volume 1 had 1 or 2 stories that are just like, okay, I could take it or leave it, but still great, but I could take it or leave it. Tales 3, all of them are just great, basically. With that being said, read especially After the Feast and Daughter of Swords, essentially full series spoilers for both of those, as I mentioned, but those are the 2 that are most directly connected, and I think the most impactful as such. But Gutter Ballet is also fantastic. All of them are fantastic, but yeah, Daughter of Swords and After the Feast, I think especially read those if you're not invested in reading all of the short stories, so at least pick it up for those. The experimental nature of the other stories and their ability to stand alone is also great, but if you only want the ones that more or less tie sort of directly into the main series, definitely read those. Daughter of Swords especially, because that one ties in ways that I think are going to be a little bit more important than, say, After the Feast, which more just kind of clears up and fills a little bit of a certain scene that just was left feeling a little empty at the time that it happened in the main series as a result of being from Hadrian's viewpoint. Where After the Feast and Daughter of Swords tie into the main series, everything else was able to just kind of be its own thing, and I think it's great for that. I'm very excited to have had the opportunity to work partially on Tales Volume 3, and I can't wait for others to be able to experience these stories for the first time. So I hope that you guys are looking forward to when this thing releases at some point in September, probably somewhere give or take around a month at the time of this video's release. And also, if you're, looking for more Sun Eater content and sort of discussion on this collection, as well as some other stuff that Ruocchio has been working on, I was able to record a discussion with Mr. Ruocchio that was an hour and a half or longer or something like that, that will be coming out in 2 weeks. So 2 weeks from the time that this video released. So on, let's see, it would be September 12th. September 12th will be the day that that video goes live. So if you're interested in that, I had a great time talking with him about a lot of different things in there, including, stuff like Lord of the Rings and other non-Sun Eater related stuff, but especially the Sun Eater related stuff was all cool. So if you're interested in that, I hope you will check that out. Thank you guys for watching. I'll be back in the next video.